So way back in 1994, Congress passed something called CALEA, and that was the Communication Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. Sounds really nice, right? Well, basically what that was the government had told every phone company in America that they had to build a backdoor into their systems so that law enforcement could listen to your calls. And if this freaks you out or displeases you, then, you're just a terrorist who hates freedom, right? Because that's where we're at, basically. And with this, along came the typical boogeymen that they usually bring out, the drug dealers, the terrorists, and organized crime. Oh, my. It's like the Wizard of Oz. It's always the same excuse that they use when they want to take something from you. I guess the whole, it's for the children excuse was busy that day, or it was another card that they hadn't played quite yet. So, they're saving that one for later on in the deck. But we fast forward to 2006, and the FCC expanded that law to cover your internet connection too. So now every single broadband provider had to build the same kind of backdoor into their networks that the phone companies had set up all the way back then. What they actually did was force private companies to build a surveillance infrastructure at their own expense, and the government basically promised it would be safe and controlled and only used with a warrant. And we all know how great the government is at keeping those promises. Anyways, the FCC had basically the authority to make telecom companies actually secure these systems and never did. Ever. Not even once. Because the telecom companies lobbied against securing their systems, and the FCC, in essence, works for the telecoms. And we'll get to that. But for now, let's just try to understand the basics. Now, Chinese hackers found those exact backdoors and walked right through them. Big shock. And the government's response to hackers using that backdoor that Congress built was to ban you from being able to buy a router that you want to buy. And this was completely predictable because it already happened. Back in 2005, someone used the lawful interception system, which was built into Vodafone's network in Greece, to tap into the Prime Minister's phone and over 100 other officials for months at a time. The engineer who found it ended up turning up dead before he could actually testify. And of course, that's absolutely a coincidence. There was no foul play whatsoever with that. Hey, would they do anything bad, right? I mean, these are the people who care about protecting kids. But that's what you get when you mandate surveillance backdoors into things like telecom infrastructure. Somebody else finds that backdoor, and people who build it really can't do a damn thing about it. And Congress kind of watched that happen 20 years ago and then turned around and forced telecoms down the exact same path of that anyway. And this brings us to a fairly large cyber attack, massive, but it's called Salt Typhoon. It got into 9 U.S. telecom companies, including Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, and compromised the lawful intercept systems. By the way, that whole lawful intercept system is not my term, okay? I didn't make that. Just so you know, you really have to love the loaded terms that exist and the kind of Orwellian doublespeak that is in play here. And of course, I'll call that out, but just, this isn't something that I'm not deeming it as lawful. I see it as illegal, but whatever. That's totally different topic. The attacks accessed the actual contents of phone calls from people that were political targets. And that's actually when all of this became a crisis. if it was like your conversations, they wouldn't give a shit. That wouldn't matter. Chinese hackers were basically sitting in American networks for years, and nobody did a thing about it. But one senator, essentially, gets his phone call intercepted, and now we've got this massive emergency. It's a major problem because it happened to the political class and not, some peon peasant, which is what all of us are that are not, senators and congressmen. But that's what it is. They couldn't have those kind of pesky threat actors learning about that famous island that never existed, right? The FBI, who is basically retarded, in my opinion, which is evidenced by insane things like the fact that they do things like take the Samurai Dev's website and then have that same site, while in FBI custody, get taken over by scammers and do absolutely nothing about it. But, that kind of says it all. Anyways, these are the same people that called the breach the most significant breach in U.S. telecom infrastructure history by a foreign government. Whatever, take that for what it is. Now, Salt Typhoon went after Cisco iOS XE devices, which are like really big enterprise-grade routers and switches that run the American telecom industry. And they exploited CV 2023-2019-8, which has a perfect 10.0 severity score and had a patch sitting right there for over a year before anyone really applied it. And CVE 2018-0171, which is a Cisco bug that was like 7 years old when the hackers actually walked through it. So, 7 years, and the patch had been available the entire time, and just no one patched it because who cares, right? But Salt Typhoon was another one, and that was sitting inside things like water systems and energy grids for at least 5 years that they know about before anyone ended up noticing. So they ended up compromising with this one RV320 and RV325 routers, Netgear ProSafe firewalls, Draytech Viger routers, and Fortinet VPN appliances. Cisco and Netgear are both headquartered in San Jose, and Fortinet is in Sunnyvale. Draytech is in Taiwan, I think. It's Taiwanese. But basically, those bugs they used were known and had CVE numbers. Like, they weren't mysterious, right? Like, they had these numbers, and they had patches available with them. And some of them for years. CVE 2019, 1653, and 1652 on Cisco devices that Cisco stopped selling in January of 2020 were also exploited. They used known bugs and living off the land techniques, which is just like when you blend into normal network traffic using built-in admin tools. And this had nothing to do with some kind of scary, secret Chinese backdoor. The threat actors were actually walking through equipment that American companies had left exposed. Pretty crazy, right? So then when we look at Flax Typhoon, which built a botnet of 260,000 compromised devices, and the FBI found 1.2 million records of infected systems, 385,000 of them in the United States alone. And it was built from ASUS routers, TP-Link routers, a few different types, basically, like Synology devices, all from Taiwan and China. It exploited 70 different known vulnerabilities dating back to 2005. Now, keep in mind, these were known, published, patchable bugs that, like, manufacturers and owners had just simply never fixed. So the government built this surveillance infrastructure that got hacked, and then they refused to enforce any kind of security on it for decades, and then they ignored the exact same thing that happened in Greece 20 years earlier, and instead their solution is to take away your ability to buy a router. Essentially how this works is like, daddy government decided in its infinite wisdom, sarcasm, that it should decide what networking equipment you're allowed to buy. And, the FCC added every foreign-made consumer router to its covered list, which essentially just means that no new models can be authorized for import, or marketing, or, sale at all in this country. And if you want a router, you now have to go and beg for permission to have one that was built outside of the U.S. borders. And since every single consumer router sold in America is built outside of the U.S. borders, that's pretty much all of them. And the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, tried selling this as a unacceptable national security risk. And we'll get to him. The links are kind of crazy, but it's kind of like the anti-firearms politician that talks about how bad firearms are and has armed guards 24/7 that we pay for, right? Telling us that the Second Amendment or whatever isn't needed. TP-Link has 6 entries on CISA's known exploited vulnerability list. Cisco has 86. The attacks that they're pointing to ban all these routers are attacks that were carried out through American-made equipment, through Cisco routers and Netgear firewalls, and Fortinet VPN appliances, and through things like surveillance backdoors that Congress forced telecommunications companies to build in the first place. But hey, listen, it's totally not because they're going to ID collect everyone, then lock those people that they don't like out of their own systems. That's totally not what's going to happen. They're not totally setting up a surveillance grid, for any of this, and they're totally not setting it up so that you can't circumvent it with electronics from another country. That's totally not the game. Listen, even if every one of those attacks had come through specifically Chinese hardware, I personally don't care, because the answer is never to hand all the power over to some government agency to tell you what you can buy and what you can't buy. Like, think about it. This is the same government that can't fix potholes. And aside from that, you're a free person with your own money, and you have every right to buy whatever router you want. The second that you actually let them slide a permission slip between you and a product on that shelf is the day that you've essentially given up something that they know you'll never get back. And you pay their salaries. So anyways, it's insane. But the government's track record on banning things to keep you safe is zero for those who are like, oh, it's just to protect us. They ban drugs. Drugs are everywhere. They ban firearms. Those firearms are also everywhere. And, they tried to ban encryption in the 90s. Encryption's on every phone right now. Right? They banned alcohol for 13 years. And, all that really did was make it so that organized crime could make millions of dollars in that short time period. So what we see is every single time they ban something, the thing that they banned keeps black markets appearing and keeps them flowing. And the only people who actually get hurt at the end of the day, typically, are the ones who follow all the rules. Those are the people that you really see suffer the most. Routers will be no different. That'll just be what it is. In my opinion, here's what that actually means for you in practice. Netgear builds in Taiwan, in Thailand, and in Vietnam. ASUS builds in Taiwan, in China. TP-Link claims Vietnam assembly, but the Texas Attorney General alleges that less than 1% of the components are actually sourced from Vietnam. The rest come from China. Companies like Google Nest Wi-Fi, Amazon Aero, and all of them are made overseas. Not a single consumer router that I was able to find is made in the United States today, is actually manufactured here. And, I could totally be wrong about that. Like, let me know in the comments if I am, but I didn't find any. So every brand that you can actually walk into a store and buy is now basically banned from releasing new models without going through this twisted conditional approval process that requires a commitment to either establish or expand U.S. manufacturing, which is going to be an insanely costly endeavor, and you'll feel that. But the conditional approval lasts up to 18 months, and building a manufacturing facility from scratch in this country takes way longer than that. EPA regulations alone are a nightmare, but industrial estimates that I was able to dig up say 15 to 40 months for a purpose-built electronics assembly plant, and that's just kind of the assembly line. You still need to import every chip and every component from overseas because none of that is actually made here. Like the Wi-Fi 7 chips in modern routers come from MediaTek and Qualcomm, but like whatever, you get what I'm saying? Like both are designed in the U.S., yes, or Taiwan, but fabricated at TSMC fabs in Taiwan on 6 to 28 nanometer process nodes. Nobody in the U.S. is making router chips at those, specific nodes in any real volume. The TSMC Arizona plant makes 4 nanometer chips for phones and data centers, which has absolutely nothing to do with routers. So the whole, made in America means that you take all the same foreign components, ship them here, and then snap them together in a build with a U.S. address and charging people, an arm and a leg more for it all. It's just a grift. It's exactly what it is. And it's all the same nonsense. It's all to sell this nonsensical security theater the same way that they sold the TSA, which, costs something like $11 million a year. It's never caught a single terrorist. It has had 500 agents fired or suspended for stealing from passengers. The TSA let 16 known terrorists fly through airports totally undetected, and had one agent who stole $800K worth of stuff in 4 years, and they failed 95% of their own weapons tests. Like, it's absolutely security theater. So Wall Street, of course, figured this out immediately, and Netgear stock jumped nearly 6% on this announcement, not because Netgear routers are more secure. They manufacture in the same countries as everyone else. The stock went up because the market reads this as eliminating competition. So TP-Link, which controls somewhere between 37% and 67% of the U.S. consumer market, really kind of depending on who you ask and what day it is, just lost its ability to release new products without government permission. Budget routers that normies get that cost $40 to $80 or whatever. I'm not really up to date on what the cheap routers cost. I buy open source routers. I can't grab mine up to everything will fall. So it's like I can't, but this is mine, and I like it a lot. But anyways, what's going to happen is those cheap routers, that people buy, are about to either disappear or double or triple in price. What's going to happen is the companies positioned to fill that vacuum are the ones with the U.S. headquarters and lobbyists in Washington. Now, if you remember, they ran this exact same kind of grift a little while ago. It was back in December when the FCC banned all foreign-made drones using the same covered list. DJI controlled 96% of all the, U.S. drone platforms, essentially. And a couple months later, the FCC granted exceptions to 4 drone models specifically, and all of them were from non-Chinese companies. And DJI is still completely blocked. And the drone market is like in an absolute supply crisis right now. And the same thing is also true and also about to happen with routers, except that routers are in every single home and, every business in America, big or small. Let's go back to Brendan Carr. And this is we're going to get into some kind of deep stuff here. So before he ran the FCC, he worked at Wiley Rein, LLP, which is a law firm that was co-founded by a former FCC chairman named Dick Wiley that basically exists to cycle FCC commissioners through it and then have them represent telecom companies on the other side. Yeah. I told you this was going to get messed up. So Carr's clients at Wiley Rein include companies like AT&T, Verizon, CenturyLink, CTIA, and the wireless industry's kind of main lobbying groups that exist. And when he testified before Congress for his nomination, he totally left out every single one of those clients, out of that testimony, conveniently. Of course he did. AT&T called him the, quote, perfect choice, unquote, for the FCC. Verizon called him excellent. And I bet they did, right? His mentor, Ajit Pai, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm sorry, I'm just a dumb American, so that's what it is. But basically, he was the former FCC chair who brought Carr up through the ranks and is now the CEO of the exact same CTIA lobby that's earning a very comfortable living representing the carriers that he used to regulate. Sure, there's nothing there, though, right? The last FCC chair before Pai, or whatever his name is, to leave was Michael Powell, and he became the head of NCTA, which is the cable industry's top lobby group. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how this is working? Before that, Meredith Atwell Baker quit the FCC midterm 4 months after voting to approve the Comcast-NBC merger and took a VP job at Comcast, eventually becoming the CTIA president at $4.28 million a year. Every single one of these people left the FCC and went straight to the very companies that the FCC is supposed to be regulating. And nobody even pretends to be surprised anymore because this is how the state works. And people are like, oh, I don't understand why you're always bashing it. If you understand the level of corruption, it's if any one of us did this, we'd get 30 years. It's crazy. Regulatory capture, just in general, now is the entire business model of the system. You basically create an agency, you staff it with industry lawyers, they write rules that crush the competition, and then they go collect their paycheck from the companies that they just helped. And then people wonder why Congress has a 7% approval rating, which, by the way, is incredibly generous. Carr also put Adam Chan in charge of his new FCC counsel on the National Security Advisory Board or whatever. It's basically the body that helps those covered list decisions be made, right? So Chan used to work for John Moolenar's House Select Committee on China, and Moolenar turned around and called this router ban a, quote, tremendous decision. Chan is also listed as a fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is a think tank funded by Sheldon Alderson, Paul Singer, and the Home Depot founder, Bernard Marcus, with millions per year and FDD published analysis in 2025, specifically advocating for equipment authorization restrictions on foreign networking gear. Bob Latta, the congressman who sponsored the Routers Act, that laid the groundwork for this has taken over $32,000 from the communication sector with AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, and the NCTA among his top donors. So he's also introduced bills to block net neutrality and ban municipal broadband, both of which are direct favors to those same donors. You get it? He's for sale, right? So I'm ranting, but this is where this all comes together. Back in November, the FCC voted 2-1 to rescind the cybersecurity rules that were put in place specifically because of Salt Typhoon. And that's the same attack that Carr is now using as his excuse to ban the foreign routers. So, even members of Congress admitted that the government shares blame for Salt Typhoon because they're the ones who actually mandated the backdoors and never made anyone actually secure them. Senator Maria Cantwell accused Carr of reversing those rules after heavy lobbying from the very telecommunications carriers whose networks were breached by the Chinese hackers. And the FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez called the rollback a gift to the CCP. So Carr gutted the actual cybersecurity rules that were designed to prevent the next Salt Typhoon, the rules that would have forced carriers to patch their Cisco equipment and secure their networks because the telecom industry lobbied against them. Then, 4 months later, he bans foreign routers, citing Salt Typhoon. So he killed the fix, he waited 4 months, and replaced it with a ban on the cheap competition. The telecom sector spent $585 million lobbying in 2024, and they got exactly what they actually paid for, which was no accountability for their own security failures and a ban on the cheap competition that existed that threatened them. So if they actually gave a damn about your router security, for example, they'd do, what the security community has been saying for years, which is mandating things like firmware updates and, creating liability for companies that abandon devices while people are still using them and allowing people to repair their own devices and supporting things like open source, right? Like Cisco stopped selling the RV320s in January of 2020 and ended security support by January of 2025. And hundreds of thousands of them are still deployed across the country with Chinese hackers just basically walking right through them. And, that's an accountability problem. Like, this is not all that complicated at the end of the day. I know I made it kind of complicated, but you get what I'm saying? The security scorecard found that 30% of all visible RV320s and RV325 devices were actually compromised in just 37 days of observation. Those are the American-designed, American-branded routers that an American company abandoned, right? Not some ooga-booga Chinese one, The covered list has been growing since 2021 with companies like ZTE and Kaspersky, like a whole bunch of different companies, essentially. Drones and, now every foreign-made router on Earth being added to it. And every time, it's the same kind of national security excuse, and every time the actual security fixes never really show up. And what does show up are higher prices and an approval process that favors the companies with lobbyists that keep adding products that, you can't buy, and they never add accountability for products that actually got hacked. And that list only continues to grow. It never shrinks. So obviously that brings us to the other question, and is my router good still? And they're not coming for what you already have or what you already own. But if you actually want to improve your security, you might want to update your firmware and check whether your model has actually reached the end of life, or If you want actual control over your network, which is what I suggest, I would look into things like OpenWRT, which has compatible hardware pretty much everywhere. You can run open source firmware that actually gets things like security updates from the community instead of relying on a manufacturer who will probably just abandon you in 3 years when it's convenient for them or when they have too many products that they're trying to sell. And if that ban makes your router unavailable, the market will do what the market always does when the government tries to do things like restrict the supply, and it will route around that restriction. People will import them, they'll flash them, they'll build them, they'll trade them. All that stuff will still be there. Your security, really is not going to come from the FCC or any other governmental entity that 9 times out of 10 is too incompetent to know what even its fellow employees are doing. It comes from you taking ownership of your own equipment and, not waiting for permission from the people who caused the problem in the first place. I'd definitely like to hear what you guys have to say in the comments about all this stuff. I think it's just getting crazy. But essentially, my biggest question would be, let me know, do you feel safer with the government banning the routers that you can buy? Like, is that good? Like that security theater, does it actually make you feel safe? It shouldn't in any case, but stay safe, stay aware. There are adversaries out there. I'll see you in the next video.